so much. I can't. Your little tongue is very busy all the time.
Enrique? Hey, Sven Thiessen here. I've got a doctor's visit morning between 9:15 and,
Uh-huh.
and 11. But
Okay.
team members from the EBCAC are here. But in essence, our comments probably are mainly related items with exceptions of the parking lifts, which we don't think should be exempted. I know this before the meeting, but that's what, so if we repeat that at the end, apologies. It's just that I'm partially leading this and I got to go to the doctors.
No, no worries. I honestly don't anticipate. I mean, we didn't receive any comments from the posted items. other than there's a few regarding, the parking lifts, and we did invite some parking lift manufacturers so we can just get more data. But I don't even know if they're gonna show up. So
Right.
yeah,
And to be fair to everybody, if you could repeat that once you guys actually formally start. I'm just doing this now simply because we're all human here, and these regulations are to support humans.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I do appreciate the input and the support. So thank you so much for letting me know. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no, and thank you guys for all the work you do, because it's not, you get beaten up a lot. Not beaten up, but we're all trying to do the right thing.
We're fine. Thank you, Sven, for your comments. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's Barbara.
Okay,
I got 2 minutes. I gotta go ask Barbara.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody see me and hear me?
Yeah, you look great.
Thanks. Hi, how are you? Happy New Year to everyone.
Right on. We got about 8 inches of snow up here.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, the temperature dipped today like 31 degrees up in El Dorado Hills, which is surprising. Okay, looks like we have most of the participants. I'm gonna get started here. Good morning, Cal Green workshop participants. For the record, my name is Enrique M. Rodriguez, Associate Construction Analyst for the California Building Standards Commission. And with me today is Timothy O'Malley and other state agency representatives from HCD and DSA. Additionally, we have representatives from the California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission, along with other BSC staff that will be introduced.
I think it goes between the knives and the toaster.
Okay. Just a reminder, please mute yourselves because we can hear background conversations. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving the Building Standards Commission the opportunity to conduct the third Cal Green EV workshop or CEVW meeting as part of the 2024 triennial code adoption cycle. Before we get started, I would like to go through some housekeeping items and a high-level overview of the notice agenda. For the record, today is January 11th, 2024, and today's meeting is scheduled from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. Notice is hereby given that the California Building Standards Commission, the Division of the State Architect, and the Department of Housing and Community Development have convened a Cal Green electric vehicle workshop meeting comprised of interested parties and state agencies to provide input and feedback for future EV regulations in Cal Green. The proposed regulatory updates may be considered for inclusion in the 2025 California Green Building Standards Code, Part 11, during the 2022 triennial code adoption cycle. The public is invited to participate and provide input and comments. Today's meeting is available via Zoom and teleconference as noted in the workshop notice and agenda. This meeting will also be live streamed on the CBSC YouTube channel. Please be aware the live stream has an approximate 45-second delay and there is no method for offering verbal or written public comments. Closed captioning is available via Zoom's automated live transcriptions. To view closed captions in Zoom, click on the CC Live Transcript button. Closed captioning will automatically appear if you are watching via YouTube. The meeting materials may be viewed on CBSC's website as listed in the agenda notice. Now, Ms. Laura Mills will read the Zoom and telephone instructions.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. To avoid feedback or other technical issues, please join the meeting through one device only. Comments will first be taken from the public in Zoom with their hands raised, then from the public on the Zoom phone line. If you wish to make a comment on a specific agenda item, please listen for CBSC staff to ask for any comments from the public. At this time, please virtually raise your hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom. You will be recognized by Enrique or me in the order that your hand was raised. At this time, please unmute yourself. When you are done speaking, please lower your hand and remember to remute yourself. Please ensure that you have a working microphone on or attached to your device prior to raising your hand to make a comment. CBSC staff will continue through the queue until there are no raised hands remaining. Then take comments from the public on the Zoom phone line. At that time, please unmute yourself. When you are done speaking, please remute yourself. When the phone comments are complete, CBSC staff will then proceed to the next agenda item. Please be sure to speak slowly and clearly so that your comments can be properly transcribed. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please call our office at 916-263-0916. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Laura. Does anybody have any questions regarding the Zoom or telephone instructions? Okay, hearing none, what I'd like to do. I'm gonna take one item out of order, but we're moving on to the agenda item 1A, purpose and goals from the charter. The goal of the CEVW work group is to garner participation from all interested parties and affected stakeholders in the rulemaking process, to inform participants of the roles and responsibilities of the state agencies, stakeholders, and the public, and to provide informed, balanced input on CalGreen proposals. The CalGreen Electric Vehicle Work Group Charter provides information on the objectives and expectations of the work group participants in the development of electric vehicle proposals for the 2024 triennial code adoption cycle. Before moving on to agenda item 1B, which is basically the timeline and the schedule, I would like to first introduce the participants, starting with our Building Standards Commission attendees. First, I would like to welcome to the Building Standards Commission, Ms. Laura Paskins, who is our new SSM1. I think started on the 1st or the 2nd, and so I'd like to welcome her personally. And then with that, I'd like to go around the room briefly to have BSC staff introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to other state agencies.
Hi, this is Laura. I'm running the show over here off to the side.
Thank you, Laura.
This is Timothy O'Malley, architectural associate. I've been with BSC for 5 years and in a support role today. And appreciate everybody attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. And then I'll introduce Laura Paskins, who's in the room today as well. She's, like I said, our new SSM1. Do we have anyone on BSC staff that can just briefly say who they are, and just we can move on through the roster?
Good morning, everyone. This is Kevin Day, Acting Executive Director. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay. Now I'd like to move on to anybody from the division of the state architect that would like to briefly introduce themselves. Okay, they may be joining a little later. How about from the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD? Okay. All right. So moving on, is there any new participants to this group that have not introduced themselves? This is your opportunity to provide your name, and if you're representing any group, this would be the opportunity to do so. Do we have any raised hands, Ms. Laura?
Oh, here we go. Mitch.
Okay, go ahead.
Mitchell Baker.
Oh, Mitchell. Hi, Mitchell. Good morning.
He lowered his hand.
Okay.
Ben Brent.
Hi all, Ben Brent, participating as a new policy manager at Switch.
Okay. Welcome, Ben.
There's no other raised hand.
Okay, so I did see some.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Okay. All right, no worries.
Kwon Nguyen.
Yes, good morning. I'm joining from ABB E-Mobility. I'm the lead for standard.
Okay, yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
I did see some folks from HCD, so just to let everybody know, the Division of State Architect and the Department of Housing Community Development do not have any proposed items that they're going to be discussing today. This is strictly going to be BSC only. However, they are going to be in the listening only mode just to garner just feedback from participants on BSC's proposals. So just please keep that in mind when you are making comments, that this is for our Building Standards Commission non-residential EV proposals only.
We have another hand raised.
Okay, one more hand.
Kevin,
Hi, good morning. My name is Kevin Goddard. I'm a staff with the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Branch.
Okay, welcome, Kevin. Let's see. Do we have anybody else?
no other hands
Okay.
raised.
So seeing no other hands raised, I'm going to be moving on to the agenda item 1B, which is our timeline. And I just wanted to spend a couple minutes to discuss where we are in the rulemaking cycle. And so then everybody can have a good understanding where we're at. So this is our 2024 triennial code adoption cycle. We craft one of these, what we call a cigar, for every 18 months when we run either a triennial or an intervening rulemaking. And just to let everybody know, right now we are basically in this. This is a final workshop for the pre-cycle activities, which does not even show up in our cigar here. It's basically,
You want to share that?
let me hold on. Sorry, I thought I was sharing that. Never mind. Sure, but
You need to.
Zoom. Hold on, folks. I want to share this timeline.
Please do.
When I click on that Zoom, it's supposed to pop up, or is it up there? Oh, it's hidden. Oh. All right.
We only have one screen.
Sorry, one of the participants was covering the share button. Anyway, here we are. Here we are. Can everybody see this? Okay. So basically, this is our 2024 triennial code adoption cycle cigar. Like I said before, we craft one for every 18-month cycle. We are basically at this, what we call the initial submittals. So we're in pre-cycle, getting prepared for what we call our initial submittals, in this case for the green. And this is going to be done in preparation for the green code advisory committees. And as you can see here, under the code advisories, there's several code advisory committees. The one we'll be presenting will be the green building code advisory committee. So anyway, this is we're at the very beginning stages of what we call kind of the initial submittal and kind of formal process, rulemaking process. But as you can see here, code advisory committee meetings are scheduled, tentatively scheduled, May 24 through August. And then, so final submittals, publication, and then the effective date, as we know, will be, January 1 of 2026. So this document is available as a document that was uploaded to the web portal when we posted the meeting. So folks can go in and look at this at their leisure. Does anybody have any comments pertaining to this triennial timeline? Okay. All right. Hearing none, I'm going to move on. Let's see here. Back to our agenda. Is that better? Okay, everybody can see it. I'm gonna do this right. I am moving on to agenda item 2A. Pursuant to Assembly Bill 2075, BSC is required to convene a workshop on EV charging infrastructure standards that includes HCD, DSA, CARB, California Energy Commission, and other relevant stakeholders to consider, among other things, projected demand for EV charging infrastructure based on the state's goals as specified. So that is kind of our ongoing mission with agenda item 2A. There really is no change from our first workshop, other than these workshops that we've been having with the intent is to meet that AB 2075's goals. Can you go straight to the agenda? So that was agenda item 2A. Moving on to agenda item 2B. It's right here. So for agenda item 2B, this is the BSC's proposal for the exception to the parking lifts that we already had in place, and we've made some further amendments based on comments received from the public, and then further conversations with other state agencies. And the intent with this was to basically, we already had this exception there in item exception number 2, and the intent here was just to align with HCD and basically have one code language that would apply for residential and or non-residential. Before we dive into this much more, we did receive communications from Bryce Nesbitt, and then one yesterday evening, and I apologize for not replying to that, Bryce, but we can certainly discuss that today. In addition to this, we did invite automated lift manufacturers to this meeting. I don't know if they're in attendance, but the idea, we certainly would like to hear from the manufacturers if they could, if they were available, you know, just to give us an update on the availability of the product and progress that's been made since this code was originally placed in Cal Green for non-residential occupancies. But with that, there really was no change from workshop number 2, other than we've had additional conversations with, like I said, other state agencies and the Department of Housing and Community Development. With that, I would like to open this item up for further discussion, and yeah, let's go with it. I see that Bryce has his hand raised. I'd like to give Bryce the opportunity to speak, and then I also see some additional hands from Scott Bradford. So Bryce, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Bryce Nesbitt from Berkeley, California. I'm an electrical engineer and a member of the City of Berkeley Transportation and Infrastructure Commission for identification only. Regarding parking lifts, you should also have received a letter from Harding Steel Corporation, which is the U.S. distributor for a large series of parking lifts. We're one of the largest manufacturers of parking lifts. And what that letter says is 100% of our lifts are already EV capable right now. They've already done that engineering work. And my concern with this exception is that it's absolute. It defines parking lifts as being EV incapable and offers no opportunity, even if a lift happens to be EV capable and happens to be installed, and it's an area where there's EV demand, it still offers an exception. And I think that that's a mistake. So this is simply copying the HCD language. I think that the error originated in HCD and it's just being replicated here. And I think that the simplest solution is to remove all the wording about parking lifts and just say that it's an exception if a parking facility is incapable of supporting electrical vehicle charging, meaning leave that very last paragraph and get rid of the rest of it. Adding EV charging to parking lifts is tremendously straightforward for many styles of lifts, as the parking lift vendors can attest to, and there are some styles of lift where it's going to be difficult. In most cases, it's simply the addition of some what's called drag chain, and I'm going to try to get this up to the monitor as close as possible, but it's a flexible plastic, basically conduit, where you can remove links and insert a wire. And that's what Harding Steel testified that they do. So they provide an instruction manual for a local electrician for how to wire up an EV charger on one of their lifts. In addition, they have a series of videos on YouTube showing the entire process, both in the United States and in Europe. In Europe, it's a little bit different because in Europe, the EV driver brings their own cord and then plugs into a platform. In one case, they plug into a platform when they park and then leave, and then the little shuttle goes zooming through the building, up, down, sideways, left, right. It might spin around. And when it gets to its final spot, it plugs the sled in and activates the EV charger. They call that their Roomba system. So the purpose of public input is not a vote. I'm not here to get 10 people to say this. That I understand from the Supreme Court, the purpose of public input is to provide information that the agency may have missed in order for you to make your own decision. In this case, I think the information that you should be absorbing is that there are dozens of manufacturers of EV-ready parking lifts now, and there is no reason to exempt the building owners from completing that, certainly not in the case where the lift is already EV ready. So thank you. And I'm happy to answer any sort of technical questions or have any sort of back and forth on this issue. I hadn't intended to do anything on this particular issue, but I saw this exemption and realized that somebody needed to jump on it. I now know that world pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce, for the information. Appreciate it. I'd like to move on to Scott Bradford.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm Scott Bradford. I am with Harding Steel, the manufacturer that Bryce was referring to a minute ago. And everything he said was accurate. And so I just second what he said about every system that we manufacture, which is a wide variety of systems. Everything we manufacture ourselves or sell is all EV capable. Some are harder than others, but they are all capable today already. That said, what he said about the Europe versus US is understandably inaccurate to what he said, because there is no functional difference. We have both those systems that he referenced in as the European system versus the US system. They both exist in the United States. The only point of confusion there is there are some systems that we do not sell that technically you cannot electrify with EV chargers. But that's a very niche system that I don't think should even be addressed in the code. It's just there's so many options that do fill that void, and that's all.
Great.
And let me know if you have any follow-up questions. Fire away, please.
Yeah, thank you for giving us and for being part of this work group. Really appreciate your input. I do have a question. How many other manufacturers like yourself provide these sort of systems that you know of here in North America?
Every single one. And manufacturers is a loose word. So many are manufacturers, many are resellers of a product that's either manufactured in Europe or Asia. or sometimes South America. But every single manufacturer that I know of is capable of providing EV charging on their system, with the asterisk of there's a specific type of system that you can't do it, which is basically it's called a palletless, fully automated system, where a little robot goes underneath your car and picks up your car by the tires and moves it around. Because the car itself there's no pallet that it's sitting on, there's nothing to really attach a cord to. That system, there's no technology available now to electrify that system. That's a very, very, very small niche, right? And I mean, almost non-existent in the U.S. market.
Got it. And how about like a car dispensing vertical system like a Carvana?
Totally possible.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do systems like those where the display towers and what would be called semi-automated or puzzle systems that you frequently see for like Carvana type of stuff. So it's generally easier than it sounds. For the vast majority of what you see in multifamily buildings, the 99% solution for hotels or multifamily, it's very simple. There are niche products like, say, Carvana. It's a little bit different because you're moving cars a longer vertical distance. We have a hospital building that we did that's a very large underground system. Those are nicher systems that are harder to do, but it's still 100% possible. So it's more of an expense and desire at that point of how much is the owner willing to spend to get all of the spaces electrified versus just a few at that level. But what you would be looking at for any coastal city really in the United States would be using almost always what we call a semi-automated or puzzle style system, or in valet situations, hotels or some residential buildings that have valets, a simple passive stacker. All of those systems are very easy to add EV charging to every single space.
Great. Can you do me a favor? And I don't know if Bryce has provided this, but can you email BSC some cost data for your systems so we can have the opportunity to look at those and analyze?
Or the systems or the EV portion of it?
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry.
Cost data for the systems themselves or the EV charging portion?
Probably whatever cost would be for someone to, if they decided to use your system, what that cost would look like.
Okay, so for the EV charging, I can answer that right now. For us in particular, and most manufacturers, our system allows you to mount whatever charger you want. We are completely agnostic to the type of charger you put in there. It could be level 1, level 2, does not matter to me, and brand does not matter to me. What we provide is essentially a pedestal that mounts the platform that the charger can mount to, and then a method of getting power to that platform. And so it's still, the charger itself is provided by the building, whatever charger they want, or the owner, whatever charger they want, with whatever technology they want. So it's upgradable in the future. And the charger itself is powered by the building, not by the lift. So from an infrastructure perspective, for the developer, architect, everyone else, it's really identical to any other charging system. It's just you have to have some more coordination in the beginning of where you put those junction boxes, because their location is much more sensitive than in conventional parking. But that's the only real downside, and the fact you have to buy a post to mount the charger to. That's the only additional cost.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I do see a raised hand, Paul Johnson.
Mitchell is second.
Oh, sorry. Oh, for some reason his hand is not yellow. It's weird.
Yeah, it's a different color.
That's a different color. Okay, Mitchell, you have the floor. I couldn't really see that.
No worries. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, earlier I was unable to unmute and turn on my camera. So for anyone else that's struggling with that, you have to click OK and accept the terms of recording before it'll allow you to do that. Thank you, everyone, for the comments. As Enrique pointed out, HCD is really here in a listening mode, but This is a pretty important topic, as HCD has historically had an exemption for parking lifts, and our current proposal continues to maintain that exemption within our code as it applies to residential occupancies. So not to put any manufacturers on the spot, or Bryce, I know you're very interested in this subject, but there's just quite a few considerations that HCD has that I think need to be contemplated. So as I've said several times before, the element of safety is definitely an important factor for HCD. But in addition to just general safety and trying to traverse a parking lift and find a location to plug your cord into and get access to a panel where you may have to put in information necessary to begin charging from a third-party provider or a building operator. The code currently has many other elements that come into play when we talk about getting from your car to a charging system, EVCS. And so the points of consideration are currently in the current CalGreen code that is effective today, as it relates to residential occupancies, there's a requirement that those EV charging and certain percentages comply with accessibility requirements, and a pointer to Chapter 11B and Chapter 11A, respectively. But also, and so that's one important element, is how do you achieve a charging system that is on either an accessible route or adjacent to general accessible parking spaces. From an access standpoint, there's a lot of considerations there, and I'm not sure to what extent manufacturers have accounted for that. But the second part is that CalGreen in and of itself has parking space requirements. There are certain minimum length requirements for electric vehicle charging spaces. 18 feet, is that accommodated by the manufacturer's products that are out there right now? There's a requirement for the stalls to be a minimum width of 9 feet. And then also 1 in every 25 chargers are required to have an 8-foot aisle. And how do you provide an aisle on a platform that is just as wide as just slightly wider than the vehicle? Again, I want to make sure that there's safety and that all other provisions are accounted for when we talk about a parking lift, where the consumer may not be savvy enough to traverse these small, thin areas around the vehicle to get to the charging location, where they are responsible for making that connection, and it's not a valet system. So these are considerations that HCD would need to flesh out before there's any sort of consideration of removing somewhat of a longstanding exception that exists, not only for HCD, but for the Building Standards Commission. So take those things into consideration. We definitely want to flesh this out if there's an opportunity to remove. And I'll just leave with one last thought. I know there was a suggestion from Bryce Nesbitt of more of a broader exception when parking facilities are not able to accommodate charging systems. And I would just err on the side of caution there that a broad exception would be really challenging to enforce, and it may be challenging to interpret as local enforcing agencies apply the code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchell. Appreciate your comments. It looks like, did we have, looks like James.
No,
Or-
do you want me to call for him?
Yes,
Okay,
Miss Laura will call.
okay. Paul Johnson, you're next.
Hi, good morning. Paul Johnson with the state architect. Enrique, if I could, I'd like to ask Scott some questions.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Scott. So I'm with the state architect, another state agency that's worked with BSC on this code pretty heavily. So one of the questions I have, when Bryce was showing the picture, it looked like some of this was aftermarket installation, meaning an electrical contractor would have to install a chase or a way for the cords to get to the cars. Could you clarify that if your systems are all, if they're factory made, to have the cords go where they need to, or
Yeah, so that is a very nuanced question. So and broadly, it depends. In many cases, so depending on the type of system, in many cases, there is already power to the platform. So on many semi-automated systems, when there's a motor that provides that side-to-side movement of the platform, and so all they really have to do is follow that existing cable that provides power to that platform. So it's a very easy thing to do. On other semi-automated systems where it has a longer distance of travel, it requires something like a cable chain, which is not built in from the factory. But it is added or would be added as part of that upgrade if needed. It's not needed in every case. And then the ones that he mentioned that are like the Roomba, those are very specialized things that are manufactured by the manufacturer, where it literally is like a docking station when it docks the platform, but that's a very small portion of the case here. Oh, and while I'm speaking, I did want to acknowledge what whoever was talking before about accessible spaces, etc. And for the 90% use case here, the semi-automated and stacker parking is not ADA accessible. The fully automated niche can be ADA compliant, but generally in a building, if you're building a multifamily building where this would really be the big focus, you are not going to have ADA accessible spaces as part of the semi-automated system. You're going to have conventional ADA spaces for that, and those can have traditional charging, just like any other system would, any other building would, I mean.
Okay. And then, so I guess when Enrico was asking about the cost of installing this, if you could just send us like a percentage, if they have to add that cable chain, or if they have to have a contractor add additional stuff, if you could just send us some sort of rough magnitude of the cost of that, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
And then if you could send pictures of these systems installed.
Yes.
Yeah. Should be helpful as well. The whole breadth of systems, as many pictures as you can send of the different systems, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I have photos and videos, as well as renderings. As renderings, you can add more detail so it's clear to see versus real life. You often can't really see what you're looking at. So I can share all that stuff.
Yeah, and if you have any of these installs in Northern California, Sacramento area, if you could send addresses and possibly look at them, that'd be helpful too.
We have none in Sacramento, but we have them in the East Bay and Greater Bay Area.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Enrique.
You're welcome, Paul. Thank you for providing those questions that are very helpful.
Next is James. Paul, be sure to mute and lower your hand.
Morning, everyone. It's James Fry from 2050 Partners, representing the California IOU Codes and Standards Group. Thank you very much for including us. This is always a good workshop for everybody involved. I had a question that I don't think we're allowed to ask each other, so I'm just going to ask the question and ask if someone could ask it on behalf of the supplier. But is there if property was to add EV charging later to a lift, are the costs much different than if they were to be added at the time of new construction? So that's another form of cost comparison that we like to help with. So that's a question just for the floor, not for me to ask that individual directly. And then finally, Paul may have asked a question that was answered differently, and I'm not quite sure, but the type of question I might expand on is, so when the customer faces their plug-in task, is the cordage from the EV charger and to their car well managed and relatively safe, or are there trip hazards or other sorts of variability that need to be addressed between the charger head, and the attached cord in the vehicle itself? That would be an open question I have for the floor. Thank you for allowing me to contribute.
Thank you, James.
Can I chime in as the manufacturer?
Absolutely.
Or a manufacturer? So,
yeah,
my personal opinion, and this is a conversation I do have with a lot of architects and developers, is that it's just like with any any building, it's always cheaper to put in the infrastructure up front than it is to do it later. That's just a given as far as economies of scale if you're building a building versus deciding to add a circuit later for the EV charger. With automated parking, that is even more so, mostly because of access to where you have to run the conduit is harder to get to when you have to work around all the other stuff that's installed on that back wall for our own cable trays and equipment that's on that back wall. So it does make it harder to upgrade the electronic circuitry from the building. It would be more expensive than doing it from day one. Upgrading the lift itself is a pretty much, it's the exact same cost from my perspective. Day one versus adding it later, the only real difference you pay for would be shipping, because if it ships with the main stuff, or you're shipping a steel post independently. But I feel like there was a third part of that question that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, the trip hazards related to the customer taking the cord off the charger post and adding it to their car.
Yes. So access around the vehicle is really identical to any other parking space. Access around depends on how big the parking space is. And so the ability to walk up to the charger, which is usually mounted on the front left corner of the platform, is the same as it would be for any other surface parking space. And depending on the manufacturer, sometimes there's cord retracts built into the charger, and sometimes there isn't. But the same cord management manners apply of coiling your cord back up on the thing when you're done with it so you can park on your space. The only thing that would be different is making sure that any residual cord, if your cord isn't coiled back up and it's just kind of hanging down, is that it's on your own platform and not on your neighbor's platform, because the platform will move. But it's a pretty it's not a big concern. It's just a very small training thing. We just make sure we point out to people when they're learning how to use the system.
Thank you, Scott, for that explanation.
Next hand raised is Bryce.
Okay, Bryce Nesbitt here again. Responding to Mitchell here, if you take a look at exception 2, it says that the exception is areas of parking facilities served by parking lifts or parking facilities otherwise incapable of supporting electric vehicle charging. In other words, you already have the broad exemption right there in the code. If I had a type of parking facility that involved, ferries that pick up the car and spin it around so it's not a lift, it would be covered by that current proposed language, or parking facilities otherwise incapable of supporting electric vehicle charging. And yes, if you just put that, well, you've already put that weasel word in, then it becomes between you, the developer, and the AJH. But at least that's better than taking a system that very clearly can support EV charging, as the representative from Harding Steel has talked about, and exempting it. So take a look at your wording there, because I think you've already put the broad exemption in. I will say that I've spoken to a number of lift manufacturers now, including Harding Steel. Harding Steel is ahead of the curve, perhaps because they have European exposure. I have spoken to a couple of American lift companies that have told me that they have not heard of demand for EV charging and do not support it at this time. That doesn't mean that their systems are incapable of adding a cable chain or cable routing, but they themselves don't provide the drawings or the diagrams that an electrician would need. Those companies tend to be smaller and focused on the home garage market. And for the home garage market, they say, well, what our customers do is that they just put a retractable cord and just bring the cord into whatever the spot is. And that's great for a home garage where you know what's going on, but I think it would be a disaster in multifamily, where essentially the cords would get tangled. And in fact, that's my biggest concern. If this code goes through as written and multifamily parking lifts are placed without EV charging, you're going to get cowboy charging. That's people and electricians coming in after the fact to add EV charging. Cords strung across and behind and clipped. I see it all. I have a photo gallery on my phone of pictures of cowboy charging across sidewalks, out windows, all sorts of crazy places. And that's really dangerous to do in a lift situation where you've got moving platforms. The people doing that might not understand bend radius or all the engineering concerns that go into doing it right. So I think take exception with Mitchell and say that the hazardous approach is to not accommodate EV charging capability right from the get-go when that system is designed. So thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. I don't know if Mitchell would like to talk or just move on to the next person.
Sure. I know there's some other folks in line, but there's still a lot of safety issues. I think the exception we're talking about on the screen is Building Standards Commission relevant to non-res. So just want to make that very clear. And the reference was into the current code that's effective today. I preface that way. But a few points that, again, need to be fleshed out in addition to pointing out the location of the EV in compliance with the existing Cal Green Code requirements. There's a lot of factors there that have to come into play when you consider where that's placed and if it has the proper aisle width when it's required, that it has the proper dimensions for that EV charging area, that the lifts may not be able to accommodate some of the manufacturers. But there's many other things that have come up as I'm hearing responses from some of the manufacturers. I don't think you can associate a traditional parking space that's at a grade of plane with a parking lift that may be elevated in height, even if it's 6 inches, if it's 2 inches, that's still an area where you have a potential trip hazard. You have the opportunity for something to occur that isn't intended. And so I don't think you can associate a grade of plane EV charging equipment that is easily accessible in the terms of getting from your vehicle to put a cord into a EV charging system, whatever it may be, and being able to do your thing on a panel in order to start that charging for the vehicle. Imagine doing that on whether, again, it's 6 inches or 10 feet off the ground, depending on the configuration. Imagine kind of traversing an area and then taking into account the larger accessibility issue and providing someone in a wheelchair the ability to do the same thing. And then I did hear the ability, and I think James brought up the fact of potential trip hazards. That's a clear exemption in 11B and 11A. There's you can't have trip hazards, but when I was kind of envisioning the responses from Scott about adjacent parking lifts, I just see a huge issue with the potential for a 220 cord getting pinched in between two lifts if it's being pulled up when you have a lift dangling from one lift to another. But these are the safety issues that HCD takes into account, and they definitely all need to be considered and fleshed out before we start mandating something that or allowing for the installation that could potentially create a hazard. Again, this is an existing requirement, and we just want to assure if we remove that exemption that there is and certainly a consideration for safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchell, for that feedback.
Next is Dennis.
Good morning. This is Dennis Corellis, a former Deputy State Architect, and I'm with the Electric Vehicle Charging for All Coalition. And I just briefly want to follow up on Mitchell Baker's comment regarding the broad exception. I concur with Bryce's assessment that you already have a broad exception. And a question, what guidance is provided to designers and building officials beyond the code language? I know when I was with DSA, we developed a guidance document giving some examples or helping people understand how to implement the code requirements. And I was curious if either DSA or BSC or HCD would consider preparing some guidance, some use cases, so designers and building officials will not have to deal with very broad language. And with that, I'll wait for comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Mitchell, do you want
Yeah,
to?
I can respond to that if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you for the comment. Definitely appreciate that. One thing that first off, HCD does not have some sort of guide for navigating exemptions that exist currently in the code. There's a struggle there, of course, when you talk about publicizing some sort of document that isn't explicit code or statutory language. It could get into the realm of underground regulation. So HCD typically refrains from doing that unless we're reciprocating the code or the code language. But that's kind of the beauty of the code. It allows local enforcement agencies to use their interpretation. And each jurisdiction has their own local topographic, geographic, et cetera, considerations when they apply the code. So HCD doesn't have any sort of release document that would provide sort of guidance to eliminate any sort of potential underground regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch, for that. I do want to echo what Mitchell has said. BSC does have a CalGreen guide book that we published every triennial, and then during the intervening code cycle, we update it and post it on our website to align with the codified intervening code cycle changes. But I do have to agree. I do agree with Mitchell that putting out a guidance document that may be interpreted as underground regulation, where we're actually providing exceptions or workarounds, I think that can be a little dangerous. The guide basically is a document that further explains the intent and how to comply with the codified code language. But Dennis, I do appreciate your comment, and this is something that we'll be looking forward into the next intervening code adoption cycle. I do have to say that if BSC was to repeal this proposal, a couple issues would come into play. One, we would basically have a regulation, a proposal that would be different for residential versus non-residential. The other issue is if BSC was to repeal this proposal, it would revert back to the current codified code language that exists now. So our intent was to align with HCD, but not really. The intent was not to have a change in regulatory effect in terms of BSC's proposal, because in the absence of this new proposal, it would go back to what it is as being stricken, which accepts that system already. So we're just trying to align and to have two agencies have the exact same code language. But with that, I'd like to move on to the next person. Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Can, yes.
Okay. Yes, I'd like to just make a couple comments. I really enjoyed listening to the other commentators. I do like this wording and would support it because it removes the word accessible that's currently in the code, which is confusing and defined in the California Building Code. I also had a question to the group on what a quote automated mechanical access open parking garage system would be. Is that another word for self-serve? And I think some of your commentators said that yes, it would be a self-service. And then it would seem that there are two conditions in this one exception. When you say or, you're pretty much saying parking facilities otherwise incapable, which is a pretty large cover and is different and distinguishable from the first condition of exception 2 proposed. And then also, when I just want to clarify that everyone's using the term parking facilities, in my mind, as an accessibility expert, a parking facility could mean one parking lot. It could mean one parking space. So it would be great if we could get more specific language. I know that that may overarch some other code language in the section, but just so we're really clear on, is that meaning something like a structure, or is it actually a thing that is defined by the term facility? I'm a little concerned about the exception in general because the previous exceptions were based on power. And this exception introduces another element of exception. I just want to make sure everyone's aware that when you have accessible charging stations for people with disabilities, those are usually located at different facilities or at different locations where power may be accessed. So by introducing this, I just want to make sure that there's no exemption for an accessible EV station based on its location in the facility, that it cannot be reached or facilitated. So those are my comments, and thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, Don.
Bryce has his hand up.
Since no one has said it, the parking lift manufacturers are clear that in a typical building, the individual lift spot is dedicated to a given tenant, and so they'll be familiar with it. And it will not necessarily involve interacting with the payment station, particularly if the electricity is being drawn directly from their tenant meter. So it's not a necessity that these systems have to involve an interaction with the charging head. The City of Berkeley's corresponding rule here is that if EV charging is not provided on the lift, it must be provided elsewhere on the same property. So that's how the City of Berkeley handled it. But since HCD went to 100% EV charging, that provision will clearly be obsolete. You can't move 100% somewhere else. ADA spots are almost always different, though parking lift manufacturers would be welcome to create double wide spots that have enough room to meet all the ADA rules. The typical way that's done is that the ADA spots are within the same area, but not on the same mechanical device. There is a wording concern in that the exception went from mechanical lifts to areas of parking facilities served by lifts. So a loose reading of that would say that if I've got a parking garage that has mixed surface spots and a mechanical garage, I get out of all EV charging requirements. I think that's a loophole in the drafting, and I'll yield.
Thank you, Bryce.
Dawn, I'm not sure if your hand is still up or if you raised it again.
I raised it again. Thank you, Bryce, for your comments. Just so we're all aware that there is assigned and unassigned parking in residential. And then also many residential products now are fluid. That is, they go from residential to transient, and those parking spaces are not necessarily used by residents. They could be used by patrons or other public accommodations.
Thank you, Don.
Scott?
Yeah, so with, as Bryce said, with the automated focus, what Don just said is 100% true. I have those discussions with developers as they're debating their parking counts all the time. The automated spaces that we were talking about, if they're automated, the spaces are assigned and it's your parking space, you're parking on the same spot every time. And so in the use of automated parking, it actually does not cooperate with the fluid changing parking that Don referenced a second ago. It doesn't work in that respect. That's all.
Thank you, Scott.
Linda?
Yes, hi, Linda Hutchins-Knowles with the EV Charging for All Coalition. I just want to point out that this is a kind of a holdover exemption from previous code cycles that no longer seems to be warranted by the facts. Parking lift companies do provide EV charging, and it seems like it unfairly excludes people who, through no fault of their own, live in an apartment that has a lift. And I think rather than maintaining this, until the next code cycle, this is a great opportunity to remove this exemption. I don't see any clear case for keeping it. And given that the code is moving to 100% access for all, it's an unfair exclusion and unnecessary. And I don't understand why HCD's position is we won't consider this until the next code cycle. It's here on today's agenda. The final express terms have not been finalized. So I would really encourage you to remove this exemption. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Before we move on to Mitchell, I'd like to once again say that this proposal here is for Building Standards Commission only, which is for non-residential occupancies. And it's not for DSA or HCD. So any comments pertaining to BSC's proposals should only be addressed to BSC staff and for non-residential occupancies. But with that, thank you, Linda, for your input. And now I'd like to have Mitchell have the opportunity.
Excuse me. Thank you for clarifying that. I could just add, I think my comment still stands for non-residential as well. I also don't see any need to exclude in non-residential buildings when these lifts can be served by have EV charging. So thank you for clarifying that this is about non-residential, but I think my comment still stands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Yeah, thanks for the dialogue, Mitchell Baker with HCD again. I'll reiterate the safety piece to Linda's comments. There needs to be some assurance of safety. We can't just negate safety for the purposes of adding in electric vehicle charging. And we heard today that there's challenges with meeting the housing and public access requirements in Chapter 11A and 11B for these parking lifts. They're required to be adjacent to existing accessible parking spaces for those percentages that are required to be accessible or on an accessible route. And so if there's not an available safe way for those that, for instance, are in a residential occupancy that are in need of charging their vehicle, but they're in a wheelchair or other means, and the only access is a charger on a lift, if there's not an option, if there's no products out there that can accommodate that, it would create a significant safety issue. And we do only have one manufacturer represented as far as I've heard today on the call. And, needing to do that analysis to ensure safety for a longstanding exemption that is, as Enrique has pointed out a few times, these amendments are intended to improve on the existing exemptions. We would have some hesitation in removing something without properly vetting it, and HD has committed our resources to many other proposals we have this cycle, and we've already submitted our package for internal review and external review. As I mentioned at the previous two CVW meetings, we're kind of beyond that point for the package that is routing, and without an assurance of safety, we'd be hard pressed to remove a longstanding exemption that exists. Thank you.
So this is Scott with Harding Steel, a quick comment on those last 2 points, which were both great and very helpful. I agree with 100% that the accessible component of EV charging and remaining accessible does not work well with any sort of parking lift. It just doesn't. So any code language now or in the future should take that into account, that even if there is an exception for some sort of exception for automated parking, it should still be required that there is accessible separate EV capable space, EV charging stations available. So I think they're kind of separate issues, and I think they need to be distinctly separate, that it's not a get out of jail free card, so you just don't provide it for anyone. And then thank you for the clarification that this is specifically for non-residential. And with that in mind of it being non-residential, I want to point out that for many of our non-residential projects, which would be, for example, hotels or office buildings that have what we call a non-self park stacker, so valet managed, like if you think of an old-fashioned stacker where you hold a button, it lifts a car up and you park underneath it, but you have to physically remove the bottom car to get to the top car. So a dependent access manual system. Those will typically be done with a charger for that lift. So that charger could either be used for 2 different vehicles or sometimes 4 different vehicles if they're parked side by side, and that's managed by the valet. And so the code language may need to consider that requiring what would be then excessive quantities of chargers when it could be valet managed, may be just an extra cost burden that's not necessary.
Thank you, Scott, for that. And I do want to clarify, you mentioned hotels. Hotels are actually under HCD's authority. We do have in Chapter 3 a scoping provision that when you have a mixed project, let's say non-residential on the first floor and then condo or hotel above it, those 2 occupancies are treated differently. So for the non-residential, you'd go to Chapter 5, and for the residential, you go to Chapter 4. And in terms of the parking, if the parking is, let's say, specific to for customers, then that portion might be considered non-residential. And if it's parking specific to hotels, occupants, and that would be treated under HCD's authority. So we do have that scoping provision in there. So local jurisdictions know this and then kind of treat it according based on the use defines the occupancy and use defines what code section to apply. But thank you for that. Mitchell?
Yeah, thank you for that, Enrique and Scott. I appreciate the feedback and information, and just want to reiterate the 2 separate elements we're talking about that I've mentioned earlier. There's the accessibility provisions that apply as scoped within Chapter 11B and 11A with a pointer in Cal Green, but there's also dimension requirements that exist for the parking spaces. We have width and length requirements that have to be met. Those are separate from these exemptions that exist that we're looking at. And there's also the aisle requirements in 1 in every 25 that still exist in the code, and that has to be provided. So when you're looking at a project as a whole, these things have to be taken into account. And if there's not a product that has an aisle width, a parking lift product that doesn't have the aisle width, doesn't have the required length or width requirements of the code, which is separate from the accessibility standards in 11A and 11B, then it wouldn't comply with the code. So there's a lot of considerations there. Those considerations take into account the safety pieces that I've been mentioning. So thank you for the feedback, but we have a lot to consider in order to remove this exemption from an HCD standpoint.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mitchell. I'd like to, being conscious of time, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item. We have till noon, and we're gonna go through it, and hopefully, I think we can do it. If not, we'll probably be staying a little bit later, and I'd like to have lunch at noon. So let's see. I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, unless there's an objection. And any final thought on this item? I see Scott has his hand raised.
Yeah, I think those are leftover.
Leftovers, but just want to know that this is something that's important. BSC will be looking at it and coordinating with other state agencies, and of course with HCD, and gathering additional information. And hopefully Scott and other manufacturers can provide some additional information that would then guide us in looking into the next proposal for the intervening code adoption cycle. With that said, I'm going to move on to agenda item 2C, which is right here. Okay. We'll be taking a 10-minute break at maybe like at 10:30. We'll get through a couple items before then. So this is agenda item 2C, and it is pertaining to BSC's proposal for section 5.106, 53.2.1 receptacle configurations. There is no change from workshop number 2, but I would like to concentrate on the code section 5.106.5.3.2.2, which is our EV charger connectors, and I'd like to give some feedback or provide some rationale and updates from our prior workshop, because there are some amendments that have been that are shown here. This code proposal was amended from the initial code changes presented at the CEVW #1 workshop. The revised proposal removes the 50% requirement from the SAE J1772 chargers and adds J3400 chargers as an option. So now either J1772 and J3400 chargers are required to be installed. This code change proposal was made as a result of the comments heard on the October 19th, 2023 CEVW #1 workshop, in which participants mentioned that requiring 50% J1772 was not needed since the J3400 chargers were going to become the national standard. BSC coordinated with HCD for similar code amendments and proposed a simpler approach to allowing for both types of chargers. This was the second workshop. We had amendments as described in this first paragraph. Then after the CEVW #2 workshop, BSC coordinated with California Air Resources Board, HCD, DSA, and the Energy Commission to further analyze the potential impact of allowing J3400 NACS connector as a compliance method. The J3400 connector should work with older battery electric vehicles, assuming that the drivers have a physical adapter and the EVSC uses a maximum supply voltage of 250 volts. The NACS allows for the use of a 408 volt 3-phase supply for a level 2 EVSC. The NACS connector is also able to capture one portion of the 3-phase and have 277 volts without the use of an expensive step-down transformer. The J3400 committee has not yet decided whether the 408 volt supply option will carry over to the finalized standard. It is this higher voltage standard. If this higher voltage standard is adopted, there is a possibility that older combined charging systems based on the battery electric vehicles would not be able to connect to installed J3400 EVSCs that are tied to a 408 volt supply, because they are designed for a maximum of 250 volts. The unintended consequence is that if the committee decides to incorporate 408 volt supply into the finalized standard, building developers may find this to be an attractive option, which may create a conflict for compatibility with older battery electric vehicles. As a result, the new revised proposal stipulates that when using J3400 NACS connectors for level 2 EVSC, and if those connectors are supplied by a 408 volt 3-phase service, then at least 20% of the site level 2 EVSC connectors shall be J1772. So it's a mouthful, but I think it was needed to explain how we got to where we're at now. So the proposal that has been revised from the second workshop is that EV chargers shall be equipped with SAE J772 with a maximum output of 200 volts, 240 volts AC or SAE 3400 connectors, with an exception or additional clarifying language that when using level 2 SAE J34 SAE connectors supplied by a 480 volt 3-phase service, then at least 20% of the EV charger connectors shall be SAE J1772 with a maximum output of 240 volts AC. Yeah, this was a result of multiple conversations with the Energy Commission and the California Air Resources Board and other state agencies. So I'd like to open for discussion this BSC proposal that is in front of you today. Thank you.
First hand raised is Bob.
Hey, Enrique and others. This is Bob Raymer with representing the Building Owners and Managers Association and the California Business Properties Association. And I'll make this very brief. We're initially fine with the proposals of 2C, 2D, and 2E. But as a background, I need to get some technical advice from Mike Stone, who represents NEMA. In the past, we've passed these things by him to make sure everything works out from his end, and we're going to be doing the same. I noticed that he's not on the list of attendees today, and so I'll seek out his guidance on this. But initially, we look good. I just want to make sure that he doesn't see anything that we don't see. Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your comments. And just to let you know, the first item as the NEMA standards here is basically we're codifying what HCD has already codified and just trying to be consistent between res and non-res. So
I hear you, and we're very supportive of having both agencies kind of do that. So thank you. Anyway, that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your comments.
Next is James.
Hello again. Enrique, this is awesome, but it is a lot of extra technology to wade through. So this takes some time to work on. I participate in the SAE meetings on an almost weekly basis on the evolution of this. And so working with Rodney McGee over at the University of Delaware on these topics is really exciting, but it's a changing landscape for sure. I believe some of your non-code language, that is your introductory paragraph, you may have used 408 volts instead of 480. So you just want to maybe fix that typo. The California IOU Codes and Standards team is really interested in helping you get this right. So please allow us to help and be happy to work on this separately. But it's very exciting to get 277 volts up and running. I believe there's a big opportunity for adapter chaos that actually will start to damage vehicles if not used correctly. And this whole idea of an opportunity to actually pivot to what's done in Europe, which is an EV outlet that has the EVSE built in to the post, and allow the customer to bring a cord that doesn't have an adapter function. It's just a cord with exactly what their vehicle needs. So I think we'll be inviting you to a panel discussion that we're going to organize in February that has a big topic about this adapter-free approach that can make sure that this is done safely and still enables 277 volts, which is, as you say, very cost effective. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, James. Appreciate any feedback. This we are going to be presenting this initial submittal in the Green Code Advisory Committee. So absolutely, if you have any comments that you'd like to send our way, we'd certainly love to see any comments from the public or interested parties.
Enrique, can I do a follow-up question to Jim?
Absolutely. This is Jim Cunningham from California Resources. I'm sorry, Josh Cunningham from CARB. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, Jim, glad to see that you picked up on the 277 linkage to the level 2 usage of the J3400 plugs. I don't have a sense of how many building developers would want to do that. Do you? I mean, that means you're making a choice to use the new NACS 3400 level 2 plug, but connected to the 480-volt supply on the building. Do you have that's a cost reduction, but do you have a sense of whether building developers would want to do that for other reasons?
I think it's a cost and complexity benefit to keep it at 277 volts. So to find room for that quite bulky and non-zero cost step down transformer, it'd be really for the buildings that have 277 volt native, the 480 three-phase, it's really a gift to avoid that type of complexity. And also those transformers get hot. So if it happens to be a building that this is an adjacent to a conditioned space, it's actually possibly a sort of an air conditioning heat load problem also indirectly. So that's another sort of savings. But it's really important to do it in a way that doesn't induce some vehicle damage. So I'm looking forward to getting this right with you guys. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful because that confirms why Enrique and his team have proposed this 20% backstop for 1772 is, if building developers do go down that path for cost savings, which is good, there's a real risk for the older EVs. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua.
Bryce?
Okay, having a little bit of internet glitch here. Sound check.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it is an exciting development that the NACS connector supports the 277 directly off the three-phase. It does, I will echo what James said, create the potential for illegal adapters creating damage. What do you do in the code? So you've got a very fixed number here, 20%. And I think that as this landscape changes, that number will always be wrong. It'll be too much or too little. And I think that the core here is that this code is covering both high and low dwell time applications. You've got employees who are parking there and then taking an 8-9 hour shift. And you've got shoppers coming in and plugging in during a short shopping cycle. And both covered by this occupancy, yet they're vastly different use cases. And how do you deal with that? Well, first, I think that it would be good for you to acknowledge that there are these two different use cases because the solutions are different. For that high dwell time application, a low power L2 pulling off some other building system is just fine. And that handles all of the employee older vehicles that are coming into charge. For the high dwell time shopping things, I think that they're perhaps better served by DC fast chargers and other solutions. So you've got this sticky wicky 277 volt issue, but I think that if you separate out your high and low dwell time applications, you'll find that that issue actually fades into the background. And when we talk about the 277 volt and damage, the NEMA connectors that you specified for plug-in chargers all have an unused neutral line. I do feel that that neutral line is harmful, in part because it encourages people to build illegal adapters in order to power 120 volt appliances. And it's not going to happen at this particular hearing, but I think that eventually we want to get rid of that extra copper for that unused neutral. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce, for that input.
Next hand raised is Mal.
Hard to point. I have two questions on this. The first is, I believe in the last workshop in December, we had talked about J3400 can be used for both level 2 and DCFC, whereas J1772 is only level 2. And so for DCFC that don't use the NACS connector, it might be appropriate to specify that CCS1 is also acceptable. Is there, I guess I'm wondering, considering the changes here, is that clarification still appropriate to make in this code? I would, I think, like to see that, or perhaps hear why that was excluded based on the last round of feedback.
Yeah, thank you for that. Joshua, would you like to respond to Mel's question?
Sure. Yeah, narrowly, this language here that Enrique has teed up for the code language near the top of the page, this is referring to when the building developer wants to install level 2 service connectors. And so in this case, we've learned that the NACS J3400 specification will allow a level 2 service to be coming from a 480 volt supply and without a step down transformer. So this language here is specific to just the level 2 application. And if a older EV driver were to plug in with a vehicle on CCS that is trying to use an adapter, but is only designed on the vehicle side to handle up to 250 volts, there's a real problem. I think the DC fast charging question that you're raising is a separate part of the code language that I'll need Enrique to kind of weigh in on, but this is the level 2 application challenge we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua.
Understood.
Yeah, and DCFC, that's the code already has made all those allowances and compliance pathways using power allocation methods and DCFCs on the 1 to 5 level for both capable, and so that's already there, and so we don't see that being an issue.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Second question is, I recognize that this proposal is only on the non-residential side, but I believe there was similar language in a code proposal for HCD's residential side. So I'm wondering if there is intention to carry this or similar language over to the residential code.
Yeah, I can say that this was amended for BSC only, non-residential occupancies. For HCD, I believe it's what they showed last time, their proposal. I don't believe that's changed, but Mitchell Baker can certainly speak on HCD's behalf regarding this similar proposal.
Yeah, certainly. You're absolutely right, Enrique. HCD is continuing to propose what has been discussed at the last CVW meeting in this space. When it comes to the current requirements, we don't have a DC fast charging component within the residential side of things. So it didn't have relevancy for HCD. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next hand raised is Tessa.
Everyone, Tessa Sanchez from Tesla. We'll be following up in public comment on what's being considered in the SAE standardization process, and I will confirm whether or not there are going to be any compatibility issues for older vehicles designed for max 250 volt. So I'll be following up there. I will, two things I wanted to know just on this conversation on adapters. One is that there is a separate track for adapters. It's going to be J3400.1, which is going to be for the design and interface. And then separately, there's going to be the development of a UL 2252 safety standard that both are in development right now. I will note on this conversation on aftermarket adapters, a driver won't be able to authenticate a charge if they attempt to use an OEM unauthorized aftermarket adapter. And I think just one last comment, I think if we have learned anything over the last 12 months is that connector standards and offerings are a rapidly changing area, and to really require any specific percentages or really any specific connectors really fails to future-proof the code, and in fact could result in equipment that doesn't work for vehicles when the buildings are constructed. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tessa.
Next hand raised is Whitney.
Hi, this is Whitney Richardson with Electrify America. I actually kind of want to reemphasize what Mal was saying about the lack of specification for CCS. I can tell that you guys mean for this to apply to level 2, but I want to say it's not super clear because those are the J1772 and J3400 are the only ones specified. And it doesn't say that these sections, 5.106.5.3.22, and then 5.106.5.3.62, it doesn't really specify that they are like only referring to level 2, except for that second part of the last one. So I think either just, and we can provide some suggestions by written comment, just to make it a little clearer that that is referring specifically to level 2 and that, CCS1 would be allowed for when folks are using DCFC to comply.
Thank you, Whitney.
Be sure to lower your hands when you're done. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any additional hands raised.
No,
No.
sir.
I'd like to go on a 10-minute break, come back and then tackle the additional agenda items. So we'll be right back. Thank you so much.
And we're all.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are moving on to agenda item 2D. And let's see. Let me get that on the board here. Okay, here we go. So moving on to agenda item 2D, I think this, can everybody see that? I think that's probably good enough right there.
Are you sure?
Are you sure? You're not sharing it.
Oh, hold on. Let's go to here. And
The green one.
oh, sure, bye.
Share on the right.
Share. There we go. Okay, folks. Can everybody see the screen now? Looks like we're live and sharing. So agenda item 2D. Let's see. And this is VSC's proposal for proposed section 5.106.5.3.2.4.1 raceway capacity requirements. And I guess on this one, VSC did some minor edits that were post the first workshop, which was held on October 19, 2023. And then also the second workshop, which was held on November 28th. And this requirement here, this proposal has been coordinated with HCD, and the intent is to move this proposal forward to the Green Code Advisory Committee. So does anybody have any comments pertaining to this VSC proposal? And by the way, this is duplicated in this section 4.1, and then additionally it is duplicated under section 5.106.5.3.6.3, which is the other code section that is related code section that is using the power allocation method. So this would apply for the EV capable spaces code section and related table, and then also the power allocation code section and related table as well. I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
Thank you again for this. Future proofing is awesome. And so when we can work together to future proof, that's really very supportive of electrification moving forward. I think this is a great step forward. And the only piece that we have commented on in the past is that the conductors be laid at the time of initial construction for 40 amp readiness in raceways to make it super trivial for building owners to upgrade without a lot of extra wire pulling and question marks and project risk question marks that the contractors would bring towards this. So if the conductors could have been 40 amp ready at initial construction, that would be how we wished this code language was written. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Bryce?
So Jim and I differ a bit on the issue of pulling conductors. I encounter the electricians that say, I sure wish those idiots hadn't pulled these wrong conductors back when, and then pull out that old stuff and put in what they need. I think it's very hard to be future-proofed by understanding what an electrician is going to do in the future, other than to have the raceway be appropriately sized. Also concerned with the very specific language here that says that it has to be sized to accommodate a 40 amps receptacle. These things depend on, it just seems extremely specific when there's a number of ways to wire things, including using the NEC tap rule in order to have a central thick bust connector, and then using EV load management and the NEC tap rule to each individual conductor. I think that throughout this whole code, I found that it is stating less of the goal that's to be achieved and trying to regulate and micromanage the actual process and work with the electricians. And I think it's to our detriment, because in the field, you tend to need to get done what you need to get done. And at this point, the code becomes a barrier to getting it done the way it's written so specifically. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Bryce, for those comments.
Can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
So Bryce, if you could provide.
This is Timothy O'Malley.
Yeah.
From BSC.
Yeah, Timothy O'Malley. Yes, Bryce, if you have a suggestion on what you would recommend on this code language that we could work on this particular item, we'd be, liking to look at that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Timothy.
Yeah, you just make sure to send me an email or something so I have your particular contact information and I can look at this.
Yeah, our general email.
Yeah, general inbox. Just how you've been sending information is fine.
We appreciate it.
Okay, do you have any further comments on this one?
There are no other hands
Okay.
raised at this time.
Great. Okay, so I am moving on to agenda item 2E. Go.
4E, I assume.
It's
2E.
2E.
Yeah.
I know it's when they see it on the screen, I was telling you about that.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's agenda item 2E. Okay, so let's see.
When they open it up.
Oh, that's weird.
The title, that's what I was pointing out. The title says, when you're looking at the tab,
yeah,
it says 4E, F, G, H.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay, so let's see. Moving on to 2E. So the changes that were made as a result of the second workshop, and I know we received emails with other suggested changes. Some of the changes that we did accept were to add the word other than office or retail. It's different from our second workshop. And of course, just to give a little feedback, we added the additional column for office and retail occupancies with increased percentages. So the idea is we bumped up the moving away from EV capable to actually install chargers. So we basically are increasing the requirement for other than office and retail buildings for occupancies for 50% to be basically installed chargers, and then for office and retail going to 75% of the EV capable spaces. So once again, moving away from the capable and requiring actual installed chargers. And then with that, some additional things just clarified here that for basically number 2, that you basically you take away from let's see, footnote number 2 was added on column number 4, once again to clarify that this number gets deducted from the EV capable. So in this case, between 10 and 25, we require 3 of the 4 to have installed chargers, which basically leaves 1 at EV capable. So those were the changes. And then this, I believe, also is once again shows up in 2 locations, because it shows up for EV capable and then also for the power allocation method. And so this has been amended to basically reflect the changes that were made for the EV capable when we're using spaces versus actual power. So does, I see some raised hands, so let's get to it.
Richard?
Are you speaking about me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi,
Well,
Richard.
thank you. Hi, how are you? Richard
I'll
Scaff.
see.
I'm the exec. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's a
I
long
didn't
time
hear
to
you.
see. How you been?
It has been.
Yeah.
I'm the executive director of a California 501c3 nonprofit designing accessible communities. And I apologize, I just got on. Being almost 80, I'm not keeping up with things like I should be, and I apologize. That's my fault, not yours. I'm concerned with a couple of things. One is how many of these spaces, this change, are going to be accessible charging stations. We now have something that I won't use names, but we were told many years ago when we proposed the very first electric vehicle charging station guidelines for accessible charging station parking places, and we're told they weren't parking spaces. We were told that there were no vans that were electric vans. Well, guess what? There are thousands of electric vans out there on the street now, as we knew there would be. And that's why we suggested it. Holland and I and a number of other people suggested it many years ago. So I'm concerned there's no details describing how many of all these are going to have the accessibility features of the loading zones and signage relating to those accessible parking spaces. They are not like a gas station. You go there and you spend 30 minutes or 40 minutes or maybe an hour, depending on the kind of vehicle you have and the kind of charging station that you're charging your vehicle at. Some can be very fast. I see now they're looking at some with future new types of batteries that are going to take 10 minutes to get 80% charge. Fantastic. Until that happens, and all of those vehicles that are now being produced that don't do it that quickly, they need to have accessible parking spaces for charging those vehicles. I'm now looking at the possibility of getting a Ford mid-height 1-ton electric van. I'm going to need accessible charging stations. I don't see that. And it looks like we may be possibly reducing the number of regular parking spaces because there are a lot of people that may have an older wheelchair accessible van and they're not able to afford purchasing an electric van. They still need accessible parking spaces. And in fact, DSA has not as yet, and I don't understand this, with a population change with a much higher number of older Americans. And as older Americans get older, if we live, many get disabling conditions and need accessible parking spaces. We have not changed the total number of accessible parking spaces required in an off-street parking lot for as long as I can remember. And I know my memory's short, but for that particular item, it's probably 40 years. So we need to relook at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for those comments. I do have some responses to that. So if I may, so first of all, BSC's non-residential CalGreen requirements are to require the installation of certain number of actual charging stations. And when it comes to the number required for those new added charging stations, we do have a reference within CalGreen that talks about referring to in this code section 5.106.5.3.4, the accessible electric vehicle charging stations, specifically, and what it says, when AVSC is installed, and it's existing code language, that's why there's a ... We refer you to 11B, California Building Code 11B, specifically section 11B-228.3. So this is just requiring the number, but once they're installed, then you have to go to 11B, and then in there's the tables that tell you how many are van accessible, how many are ISA, have to be, and it gives you all the requirements and the plugs and the connectors. And it gives you a table of how many have to be dedicated, accessible, and then van accessible. And so there's a whole table, and the more chargers get installed, the more there's a percentage of actual accessible EV capable spaces for those chargers. So that's already addressed here. And then I think we also have signage is also included in here, specific to section 5.106.5.3.5 charging station signage. So Richard, we appreciate the comments, and I do believe that this is already in place. If you have issues with the numbers that are currently in CBC 11B, then I would suggest talking to DSA, as you know, they are the author of that code section for accessibility. This is for non-residential occupancies only.
Right. If I could, may I be allowed to respond to that?
Absolutely. Yes.
I thank you for that clarification. Once again, I would ask that the Building Standards Commission ask DSA to respond to that concern and raise the issue of the need for additional accessible charging parking spaces, based on the fact that we now have vans and cars available that can be modified to make them accessible. The reason we didn't, that DSA told us we didn't have an increased number of accessible charging stations, was because we didn't have those kinds of vehicles a number of years ago. Again, I would ask the buildings, me at the Access Collaborative will have very little effect on what DSA does. I would ask, that's why I'm asking that the Building Standards Commission go back and say, DSA, this has been raised. We want to hear from you about what you will propose to increase the numbers.
So Richard, are you saying that the current tables that are in section 11B.2.6.3, that those tables do not provide adequate dedicated electric vehicle charging?
I do. And the reason I do is because of the signage. If you remember, when the very first accessible charging station parking places, I now call them, were required by Title 24, there was a minimal number, number one, and number two, the sign requirements don't have those accessible parking spaces only for people with disabilities, like accessible on-street and off-street parking is only for people with disabilities. So anybody can use those, even though they are designed to be accessible for us. Unlike non-electric charging station parking spaces required by code, which is inadequate these days, we not only don't have the correct number based on our population, they're not even guaranteed to us. And that's an issue, because we don't get equal access under California Title 24 to what the general population is getting, either in the number of parking spaces that are required for us, or the number of, and I'm going to put this in quotes, accessible off-street charging stations. And especially the off-street parking stations, parking places, because we don't get them as we do with off-street parking that are defined specifically for those with some type of physical disability. So there's a problem here. And we are not making, the disability community is not benefiting from the increased number of electric vehicles and types of electric vehicles, because we have much more difficulty in finding charging stations that we can use, especially those of us that use wheelchairs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Have you considered doing a petition either to BSC and or DSA with your concerns, and also providing, because the tables are already there, and providing suggested code language updates that would be very helpful to state agencies in analyzing future updates. The petition process is a good process to use and has been used in the past, and I'd suggest maybe go look into that and see if that's an avenue that you'd like to consider. But
well, I would do that, except I'm a volunteer. I am pushing on many different issues on many different levels with many different organizations and state and federal agencies. And I'm a single person doing all of this. I don't have the energy at almost 80 with most of my life disability. I'm asking that the Building Standards Commission, who has one member representing us out of 11, make an effort to support our need and ask DSA to consider these issues.
Can you please send us an email? So, please email us.
I will do that.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Yes, thank you so much. Moving on to commenter
Bryce.
Bryce, go ahead.
Okay, the overall comment here is you're messing with the numbers up and down, number of spots, a little bit here, a little bit there, and allocating them. And that's all fine. But what it's missing is dwell time. You're mixing office and retail as if they were one thing, and they're not. A employee who comes and sits for 10 hours or 8 to 10 hours in a parking spot needs a different type of charger than someone who comes in to a hotel or motel occupancy after a long drive, or a retail occupancy. They're just quite different. And as such, you're likely to have too much capacity in some and far too little electrical capacity in others. As well, this doesn't speak at all to the issue of EV charging for everyone. If the goal is for everyone with an EV to be able to conveniently charge it, you wouldn't have these 20%, this complicated table. You'd have a very simple statement that says that the demand for EV charging will be accommodated by the building. Full stop. Because that's where we really want to get to, is EV charging for everyone. Not a big pile of chargers that have never been used, rusting out in Inyo, California, and a line of people playing musical cars at lunch in the Central Valley. EV charging for everyone would say that you're going to mandate the electrical capacity of the building and then let the charger heads follow demand.
Thank you, Bryce. James, go ahead.
Thank you. Our comments are creeping in, which is great. Thank you very much for supporting some of our inputs. The other sustained comment we have in general, again, I'm from the California IOU Codes and Standards Group representing them, is the readability of tables like this. I believe we've made comments in the recent past that enable users to avoid doing subtraction on the fly to get the numbers right. And so I'd like very much for for those that are stuck using this table in real life to possibly contribute also to the fact that AV capable space versus some of these others gets a little complicated and it's easy to get it wrong. So I'm still asking you for a few more columns and just get the math kind of distributed so that there's the results is a no math process for the users. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any other comments? Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to agenda item 2D. 2E, sorry, 2E. No, that was 2E. 2F. Right?
Yes, sir.
I believe so. Okay, here we go. Okay. So yeah, so we're moving on to agenda item 2F, which is our final agenda item. This one here basically this is for additions and alterations, and we heard comments received. Let's see here. There were some basic changes that were done, and that was as a result of minor edits were made post the CEVW #1 workshop held on October 19th, 2023, and the CEVW second workshop held on November 28th. And there was a lot of robust discussion, and here's our proposal. It's very simple. We're just asking once again to build out all the existing EV capable spaces, utilizing the existing capable allocated power and infrastructure. And then if an area being added or altered prior to adding any new EV capable spaces. So basically, we're basically saying just use the power that's and capable spaces that are in place prior to adding additional EV capable spaces or infrastructure. We want to build out what we have there from the very beginning. So does anybody have any comments pertaining to this BSC proposal?
James?
Thank you. In general, we're really happy that existing buildings are getting addressed anywhere, and it's a big part of the solution moving forward. We'd like to maybe celebrate the end of these draft items and maybe a moment or two to think about it. Are the ways to influence the rest of government related to exception tracking? So we know it's not a code language thing, but what we would like to do is maybe enable all 57 of us to think about the absolute right way to encourage, maybe through legislative action, this idea of tracking exceptions, so that when building owners avoid adding infrastructure, they do it through a exception process that is local. And the idea is when that succeeds, then spots don't get born. And what I'd like to do is imagine that we are as careful as possible about using exceptions and learning from them moving forward. So would it be okay for us to talk a little bit about how to get exceptions tracked for this specific type of measure? That's one question. And then the other is, as we move forward to trying to increase access for other sorts of buildings, are there other building code triggers that you're considering in the future that you would like help on to get the research finished so that we can plan ahead for the next cycle? So are there other trigger types that are kind of in mind's eye of experts, or things that are non-trigger but are still important parts of a building life cycle that we can't address through code, but maybe we can address through a different way? So as we struggle with buildings that, we're at the mercy of new construction in this case, or we're in the mercy of parking lots that are getting renovated, which may also not be enough. So thank you. Those are the two questions: exception tracking, and then possibly new triggers or other sorts of building life cycle behavior that we could so we can increase accessibility to charging. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for that. We certainly appreciate any input from stakeholders and interested parties. And we have heard comments on the second workshop regarding some of the exceptions. Moving forward into the next intervening code cycle, we'll certainly look at some of those and see if some of those can be refined. But certainly appreciate expertise and input. And so as we move on to the next one, we will make sure to keep you guys, keep everybody in the loop and appreciate any feedback. We're always trying to improve the codes. We know that they're not perfect, but we still are looking for statewide applicability, but certainly appreciate your being here and your feedback. So thank you very much. In terms of the tracking, I guess we could discuss possible ways of tracking. I know the Energy Commission, they sometimes track ordinances, and the ones that are either amending Cal Green to be more restrictive and that may have tiers that pertain to energy related items or amendments. So we certainly, it's an interesting question that if we could find the way to maybe track what jurisdictions are doing with some of these exceptions and how these proposals are actually being used out in the real world, as we call it. So, but yes, it's a tough task, but certainly a very intriguing question. But thank you for that.
Nina?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having us all here today. I am just making a comment on behalf of my team at TRC. So my name is Nina Siegel from TRC, speaking on behalf of Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, two community choice aggregators serving 34 jurisdictions in California. Since 2020, these CCAs have supported the adoption of over 29 EV reach codes across their member agencies and have years of experience implementing EV charging infrastructure programs in retrofit applications. We would like to note the potential negative impacts of the additions and alterations provision without a refined minimum threshold defined. The code should ensure that instances where a property owner wants to install level 1 charging infrastructure, including EV-ready receptacles, is not penalized and forced to install L2 chargers at a much higher cost. This may result in lower access or fewer projects getting launched and could be detrimental to the primary goal of providing more charging access to residents. Consistent access to level 1 charging provides enough miles to cover the average daily commute in the PCE and SBCE regions. Level 1 is also a central component of many CCA and utility EV charging retrofit programs. So thank you again for all your hard work and consideration.
Thank you, Nina. Appreciate your comments.
Thanks.
Bryce?
Okay, Bryce Nesbitt here, addressing the triggers here for under section 5.4 alterations for existing. We have 3 exceptions. Increase in power supply, new photovoltaic covering the parking, or some triggers. I think there should be an additional trigger here, which is construction such as seismic or retaining wall that blocks future conduit access for EV charging. That's a point where it's incredibly cheap to throw some conduit in if the developer just thought about it. And they don't, because they're seismic contractors or whatever, or retaining wall contractors. So I'm suggesting adding a section 4 regarding blocking future EV work. We have to be realistic that these triggers are incredibly rare. 90%, 99% of existing buildings and workplaces will never hit any of these triggers. And that means that we don't have EV charging for everyone. We have EV charging for people who happen to work or have a retail environment that happens to have expanded its parking lot or hit a trigger. That's not universal access. It's not where we need to go. And maybe the building code is the wrong tool for this. But if it's the wrong tool, then the building code people should be raising their hands and bringing the right other regulators in so that we can get EV charging access for everyone who needs it, regardless of whether their building happened to undertake a retrofit like this. EV charging for all should be the goal. The nameplate, it's really simple to say, and it's actually fairly simple to do if you're using the right hammers and have the right people in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce, for that. I just want to have a follow-up question on that. So when you're talking about the specific condition where you can just throw conduit and through a wall, that would not be the exception number 4. If placed, would require actually installed EV capable and chargers. So is that what you're intending?
No, absolutely not. I'm talking about throwing an empty conduit of a specified side through the concrete retaining wall so that you're not precluding through that action the future EV. I'm not getting into the issue of forcing somebody who's doing seismic, for example, to add EV. I'm just saying you shouldn't be blocking it.
Okay.
And I have seen this situation where I go into a building and say, what do we need to do to put EV charging in? And we go, oh my God, there's an engineered retaining wall here.
Got it.
And when you have an engineered retaining wall, only the engineer who originally drew it could approve drilling a hole through it. And so that takes what would have been a trivial job and it turns it into a zoo, all because some guy, like if you just talked to the construction worker and said, could you throw this pipe in? It would be perfect. And the reason to do that in the building code is that when you go apply for a permit is when you see a checklist of things you have to do. And if one of those checklist items ends up being don't block the electrical panel, well, then you'll check that box. And if it's early enough in the process, it'll be really cheap to do. If the architect sees it, great. If not, the builder, or at least the plan checker. The earlier in that chain, the less expensive it is. By the time it's been there for 5 years, and you can no longer even track down the original engineer and you don't know where the rebar is, it becomes impossible to add that conduit. So absolutely empty conduit as checklist 4 when you're otherwise blocking future EV charging.
Okay, thank you, Bryce.
Dwight.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dwight, we can hear you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this workshop and for all the participation. I have comments in 2 areas. One, I would like to follow up on the PCE, the TRC person who made a comment about their programs. And I would also like to follow up to Jim Fry's comment about tracking. Having worked at SMUD for 30 years on electric vehicle programs, having flexibility to be able to do pilot programs, to begin to learn in serious fashion what works and what doesn't work, what's cost effective, what's not as cost effective, and most importantly, what's useful and valuable to the EV driver is critical. And if there are restrictions under alterations or additions that prevent, whether it's a CCA or an electric utility like SMUD, where I worked on EVs for so long, that prevents them from implementing pilots to be able to accomplish these things, then it's not to all of our mutual benefit. So somehow it would be good if the code provides for that and doesn't unintentionally prevent them from implementing pilots where they can learn and very possibly provide input to the code in the future about how to go about incorporating the ability to provide pilots. So I would totally support the TRC comments there. The other one is with regard to tracking that Jim Fry brought up. It strikes me that it's super important to be able to understand how the code is being implemented with regards to electric vehicle charging. And Jim's focus was mostly on the exceptions, but I also think it's really important to track exactly how many EV ready circuits, EV capable provisions, how many EVSE are going in, just some basic metrics. I know that this is a huge challenge. With over 500 jurisdictions in the state of California, it's like, oh my gosh, which one of us wants to take on that challenge? I don't know what the best way for y'all to do this is, but there needs to be some mechanism for feedback to help you all craft codes that are most meaningful and achieve our objectives of EV adoption. It just seems to me like without any kind of feedback loops that are more formal. I mean, you can reach out to the local AHJs and staff and say, hey, what are you seeing out there? What are you implementing? What are the builders asking for? It seems to me like there needs to be a more formal process that allows you the benefit of being able to look and see how things are being implemented so that you can craft codes that basically address any issues that you're beginning to see. So so along with that comment, I have a question is like, how do you handle this? How do you gain insight into how your current codes are being implemented or how you would expect the code when it's adopted to be implemented in the future? How do you do that so that you're not flying blind? Because that's my concern. It strikes me that without a formal feedback loop, you're sort of flying blind on how the code is being implemented, whether it's the exceptions that are being requested to all the AHJs or just the number of EV ready circuits, EV capable EVSE that are actually being installed to see how these are helping us all get to our climate change goals and to achieve the governor's 2035 objective of EVs for everybody. So that's really a question. I'd really like to know how you all get feedback as part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. I do, just to give some feedback, I do know that the Energy Commission does analysis and reports. That is an AB, which one's the 100, the one that where they're tracking SB 100, right? I think SB 100 where they have to do some reporting. I think also CARB also does some, they do have where they're doing some research and analysis as to what systems are being installed, and so other state agencies are being required based on some sort of assembly bill or Senate bill to do some of that metrics and analysis. So, and we look at those reports for guidance when we're looking at developing building standards. But yes, it is quite challenging, and we're basically are going to be relying on other state agencies that have more expertise on that. But it'd be great if there was some sort of mechanism that we could use to track all of these, number of charges being installed and percentages and all that. So, but there are some agencies that are already looking into that.
Yeah. Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I think that's great. It would be really helpful for those of us who are able to invest time and energy into providing input on the code if Joshua's group or someone at CARB would provide those documents as part of these workshops. It would be a great follow-up if CARB or the CEC could send out to everybody who's a participant here the reports that you're speaking about so that we can see what kind of feedback loops. And in the future, I would suggest that as part of these workshops that it would be well worth everyone's time to take 30 minutes to provide an overview of what you've observed over the last year, 2 years, 3 years about how the code is being implemented. I think that would be so instructive. And just the process of having to do that for you all as an agency, I think would be educational, and it would be super educational for all of us who are spending time on this over 3, 4, how many ever years we're involved. You know, it'd be really helpful to see how things are actually developing in the field. So any reports by CARB or the CEC would be, and the references and the links would be super helpful. And I think it would save us all time and energy. I think it would help clarify a lot of issues. It would be able to allow us to speak more specifically to issues that we think that exist, maybe confirm or that they do or don't exist. I think it would benefit everybody immensely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight.
Next is Kelly.
Hi, thank you. The Senate Bill 1000, Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Assessment, it is a pretty useful portion of the Energy Commission's website. Just to share that, second that. So the local energy codes team, this is Kelly Cunningham with PG&E and the statewide investor and utilities codes and standards team, does track electric vehicle ordinances that extend above the base code. We have a pretty robust list by jurisdiction and all the nuances on localenergycodes.com. That's for everyone's resource, and we intend to keep doing that. And we have occasionally reached out to these jurisdictions and asked, how's it going? What are you seeing? Maybe it's time to do another assessment, but at least that list could be a resource for persons on this call who also have that type of resource to be able to investigate. So I hope that's helpful to the group. Because we do track everyone that we're aware of that's passed, and we feel it's pretty comprehensive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly, for that input. Very helpful.
James?
Enrique and team, I think Bryce touched upon the value of foresight when it comes to planning your parking lot's future relationship with charging. And so one idea is to not encourage / require parking lot owners to start planning ahead and not just allow poor planning to be have EV charging access be a victim of poor planning. And so there might be an opportunity to have a plan filed with your building office to say that this is the parking lot, this is where the panel is. The idea is as electrification occurs, this is probably where I'll put stuff, or the designer could be involved and say, all right, if we do this, then this wall will change. Okay, when we have that plan in the future to change that wall, which means we have to plan ahead. So the idea is if you plan ahead for nearly full electrification of spaces and work backwards, it might provide a very helpful guide to each parking lot about what to do next. And it'll also be very economical when it comes to when you bring in a certain trade to do some work. The building office could say, well, this type of work requires you to look at your plan and maybe requires you to add these raceway elements, not the full install, but these raceway elements would go in because this trade is coming in for the reason. So the idea is to have a plan that everyone can refer to be economical with retrofit activities over parking lot life. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim, for those comments.
Sven?
Apologies, sorry about that. I want to second the PCE comments made by TRC. In this, it's what's critical is access to charging. And so if you're doing a project with just level 1, which we know does the great majority of the job, I know lots of people, 1/3 of EV drivers are charging at level 1, supposedly. lots of friends are doing it, doing nothing wrong, then we should not nix this option just because we go to install this low charging. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven, for those comments. Do you have any final comments regarding our last item?
Michelle?
Hi, hi, this is Michelle Pierce, and I want to second or third PCE's comments through TRC, what Dwight said and what Sven said. The objective is access to EV charging, and I use level 1 for years, and it does the job. It's better than nothing. So please be careful not to let nothing happen rather than level 1 happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate your comments.
Dwight?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to follow up on just one additional item that Dennis Corellis had raised earlier. Dennis's involvement as heading up the accessibility task force for DSA. As part of that, they had actually published an advisory manual that is a guidance document, especially for builders, architects, and engineers who are attempting to comply with the accessibility code. So, it was a document that used the basic code as the source, but provided comments on the side or, as part of it, so that anyone who was reading the code could get some additional insight as to how their use case might apply. So I would suggest that I think Dennis is going to send you a copy of that. You may already have access to that. It's still online. I think it would be beneficial if HCD or Building Standards Commission were to give serious consideration to a similar document for the residential and non-res standards. I think it would be really helpful to those who are involved with new construction to be able to take a look at that and see instances where their use case it has some guidance. It would save a lot of guesswork, and I think the AHJs would also be grateful to you all for doing that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. Just to reply to that, BSC does have a non-residential guidebook that we're actually in the final throes of updating to reflect the last intervening code cycle changes, and then we will be updating that further as we move on to this 2024 triennial code adoption cycle. So BSC does have that avenue and that guidebook that we constantly update at every 18-month cycle. So appreciate your comments though. Go ahead, Bryce.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I'm assuming we're on to action item 3 related items not on the agenda. Is that correct?
Not yet. Well, we will be just in a second. Any final comments on specific to additions and alterations? If not, we're moving on to the final agenda item, if I may. Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to move on to close it. I gotta close all tabs.
Yeah, you have a lot.
I had a lot of tabs.
Tabs, they multiply like rodents.
Okay, here we go. Double click faster. Okay, so now we are on to agenda item 3, related items not on the agenda. And we have basically about 20 minutes to wrap this up. So yes, go ahead, Bryce, if you have comments regarding agenda item number 3.
Okay, I'll start by saying I'm trying to speak up for the stakeholders who are not in the room. You got a bunch of activists, electrical engineers, code specialists, a whole bunch of vendors, manufacturers, but what you don't have is anybody here representing the interest of users. Just regular people who have a job or an apartment. Unfortunately, they're not here to tell you things. So I'm going to do my best to channel them. And I get to park at home and charge at home, and I come home and I plug in and then I forget about it. Yet many of the codes that you're pushing towards here are leading to musical cars on the part of tenants and users. Many of your codes on the commercial side and office side have limits. They specify a certain number of charger heads. And once one more person than that shows up, there won't be a charger head for them. And your related agencies are doing strange things. For example, I install the type of EV charger where when a tenant has a dedicated parking spot, they each get their own charging head, they come home, they plug in, and off they go. And it turns out that the state's major subsidy programs for supplying EV chargers, Communities in Charge and the PG&E program, won't fund those. They're prohibited. They completely exclude any dedicated charger head style of EV charger. And I think the net result of this is agencies that have not walked the walk. They haven't been to the buildings with the lifts. They haven't talked to the people who are parking there. They haven't talked to the tenants. Because if you did, you certainly wouldn't be prohibiting the convenience of having a single charger head for every parking spot. And I want you to think about that generally, not just in terms of action item 4BQ8, but how do you bring representation from the people who we are trying to encourage to buy and use EVs into this process? Thank you.
Thanks, Bryce. Michelle, go ahead.
Sorry, I meant to support what Dwight said. I'm not exactly sure it's the exact same document that he's talking about, but I do. One of my part-time jobs is working for a company that does design of EV installation for the state of California. And there was a DSA, it started out, I think, as a presentation, and we use that document all the time. So, you know, I want to support the idea that you guys have some type of easy, easy way for designers and contractors to just decide on or help make decisions. Like for me, it's when I'm out in the field and I'm trying to figure out how many ADA spaces I need versus how many regular spaces. That document's right there in front of me. It's just a page, blew it up, carried everywhere when I'm in the field, and in the office, still refer to it. So having an easy to understand document that's, you know, the code, but not the code is really, really helpful, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thank you. One request and comment I wanted to make. This was brought up on the last call. I know I filed this in my comments and there were joint comments as well. Clarifying in the code that level 2 chargers can be used in place of low power level 2 chargers and still meet the code requirements. It was mentioned in the last workshop that that was kind of implied and obvious for anyone who works in the code, that you can go above and beyond the minimum, but at the same time it seemed like that was news to everyone. So I would ask that that language be included in there so that in the future, as we're installing chargers, if an HJ sees that we put in level 2 chargers rather than low power level 2, there won't be any question about whether we are meeting the code requirement.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, the Cal Green code is a minimum code, just like every other code in California. And it's pretty industry standard that that's the minimum. You can always go beyond it. In Cal Green, we currently have the allowance of low power level 2, DCFC, using both capable tables and sections or power allocation method. But I appreciate your comment, and yeah, we'll look into that. Thank you.
Sten?
Give me 1 second. This is addressing the HCD's primarily regulation, which I know is not for discussion directly per se, but the comments that we've heard today apply quite heavily to HCD, and we would ask that they take these into consideration. As we've already heard from Peninsula Clean Energy, and our coalition has been a longtime supporter of level 1 charging. So in additions and alterations in HCD's section, just like we've requested in BSC's, that when you go in for a project that just installs level 1 charging, and right now Peninsula Clean Energy is giving $2,000 per level 1 charger, that you're not damned and have to go up to a low power level 2, that just a project that installs level 1 gets to do the level 1 charging. Again, as you've heard over and over, access is what counts, not so much how much power is being given. Then again, this applies to HCD's residential Cal Green. Lifts should not be exempted. We've talked about that at length. And then EV charging at the receptacles. Again, we're working with the building industry to keep costs as low as possible. So that's why we are so pro receptacles over the actual chargers. We don't want the landlord or the condo association to have to buy these chargers, especially if there's potential for them sitting. We just need receptacles, but we need that signage at those receptacles saying this is for EV charging. And then this is our last specific code change is in single family homes. Currently, for at least what we've seen, the language is EV capable. We build, and again, Bob or Chris from CBIA, if you're on the phone, correct me if I'm wrong, California builds roughly 50,000 new homes, single family homes per year. In Palo Alto land, I can't get an electrician to come out to my house for less than $2,500. I'm using just an average of $1,500 per job. That represents $75 million that the California family homeowner has to spend to retrofit those 50,000 homes. $75 million. And you probably would spend the electrician when they do it at the time of construction to go from EV capable, just running the conduit and wiring that to the breaker is probably less than $50. So it just be nice, sensible, commonsensical regulations to go from change from single family homes being EV capable to EV ready. And then I want to reiterate something that we see as being really important in multifamily housing, and that's the issue of how much the electricity costs to be able to charge your car when you have an EVSP. And I'm not lying. I have founded an EV charging company. I am one of those vultures. And yes, there's a pound of flesh collected, but when you have assigned parking and direct wiring, then you eliminate those fees and you actually have equitable pricing for EV charging. And this is really critical. And so whatever we can do to push assigned parking such the wiring runs back to that individual unit's meter saves everyone a huge amount of money. Think about that. That is a real equity issue here. The final equity issue, because once we have access, then it's all about the equity in the pricing of the electricity. And then finally, just as Dwight has said, we're real supportive of use case documents, guidance documents, and we would be honored to be a co-author on those documents, or at least have them availability for our review. We are in the trenches. I mean, Mitch and Enrico, I don't refer people that call me to ask for advice for charging in multifamily housing to you guys. You're too busy writing code, but I get that. My friends get that. EVCA gets that. Probably once a week, someone calls and says, hey, could you help me get EV charging into my apartment or condo? So having case studies and again, providing access to all, thank you for doing that. And I know it's been a hard slog for 3 years, but we finally got there. I only wish we'd done it in a year and a half.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Dwight, you have the floor. We have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. Hey, I just pulled up your 2022 guide for the Cal Green Code. Thank you for the reference for me. This is a very high level document, which is fine in and of itself. Provides sort of high level interpretations. What I was thinking more along the lines was something that actually presents use cases. We've discussed this with CBIA, with Bob Raymer, talked about the 3 basic use cases and then extrapolating on those to maybe a dozen or so that would be immensely helpful to builders, architects, engineers who are involved with this to be able to begin to see how the code interpretation for different use cases might apply to their particular project. So I appreciate the high level guide that you have developed, but I would suggest that you encourage more along the lines of use case documentation and presentation. Bob mentioned that there might be funding available as part of some of your grant processes, I guess, to do such a thing, which would be fabulous, and I'm sure would be to everybody's benefit. And then also about what Sven had said, I'm part of a study that's somewhat ongoing at this point into the pricing question, especially for those who reside in multifamily homes. But of course, it also applies to public charging. And I know that AB 631 deregulated the price for public charging, but there is a big discrepancy between the price that we who are fortunate enough to live in single family homes pay compared to the price that those who live in multifamily homes end up having access to and paying for electricity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwight. Any final comments? If not, I'm moving on to agenda item 4, which is basically action items. It's just there as kind of a placeholder. We know what we need to do moving forward into prepping for the initial code advisory committee meetings. I do see one final hand raised. Mal, you want to speak? Go ahead.
We can't hear you, Mel.
Mal, you have your raised hand? Would you like to speak?
She's unmuted. We can't hear.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, we don't hear anything. So maybe you can send us an email if you'd like. And then Bryce, is that intentional raised hand?
Yep, that's intentional when you're talking about future processes here. Everyone should be aware that the updates are being made in the California grant cycle for EV charging. Many EV chargers, especially the DC fast chargers, are actually subsidized. They're not yet profitable to install, so there's grants involved. Those grants cover all types of occupancies from roadside to hotels to multifamily, 4 chargers and up. That process involving at the California Energy Commission is wrapping up with final comments on January 19th at 4 p.m. And that's the one that I mentioned that currently prohibits funding for any dedicated parking spot, but it does much more than that.
Thank you, Bryce, for that update. Okay, folks, I I think we're at the.
So Mel, I think Mel wants to try again.
Oh, Mal, would you like to speak?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for bearing with me. A technical issue on my part. So I just briefly wanted to raise an issue that had been on the agenda for the last meeting, but wasn't up for discussion on this one, which is the residential mandatory measures related to hotels and motels specifically.
Sorry, I'd hate to cut you off, but that is not as part of this workshop. That's strictly for HCD. I'd highly recommend that you communicate with them directly, as this workshop is only for BSC's authority for non-residential occupancies. So I hate to, not trying to be rude. I just want, in the interest of time, I think that you have HCD's contact and Mitchell's contact. I'd recommend that you communicate with them directly, as that would be the agency that would have the ability to provide proper responses and feedback.
Understood. I will do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And then I'd just like to mention to everyone that all of these proposals, HCDs and BSCs, will be heard on March 6th and 7th at the Green Code Advisory Committee, and we will be noticing that 2 weeks, 15 days beforehand.
Yeah.
So if you're not signed up on our email list, you can sign up on our email list to receive those notices.
Yeah, thank you very much. And certainly in this, obviously this workshop is being live streamed and will be available
on our YouTube channel.
Towards the end of the day. And with that, Bryce, you have a final comment you'd like to say? I'm wrapping this up in a couple minutes. Sven?
His hand went down. Yeah.
Okay, Sven, are we good?
I missed the date of the Code Advisory Committee. March, what was it?
6th and 7th.
March 6th and 7th will be our Green Code Advisory Committee slated for 2 days. So everybody that's being part of this conversation today will be notified, because we have all of your email information, and so there'll be a blast that'll go out, e-blast that'll go out to everybody.
This work group
HCD, is that HCD and BSC?
And DSA, if they're proposing any green amendments, yes. All the agencies that are proposing a Cal Green amendment will be part of that, presenting to the Green Code Advisory Committee.
This work. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. And I see Pamela.
Yes.
Ada?
Yes. Yes. Regarding the Green CAC March 6th and 7th, those are tentative dates. We just got some notification today, so that might change, but they are tentative dates right now. Okay.
Thank you for that feedback. Very valuable. Everybody will be duly noted as to the actual date. And we'll be posting just like we posted for these pre-cycle workshops, we'll be posting all of the documents for those Green Code Advisory Committees on our website, just like we've done for the 3 workshops today. Closing up, Timothy O'Malley, what would you like to say?
Just want to remind everybody that this work group is going to continue next cycle.
Right.
So everybody, do your homework, come back with some good code change material for us to work on. Bring us our data, bring us the data that we need to make these changes. We really appreciate your input. You guys have been great today, and I want to thank everybody for joining us, and Enrique for the facilitation, and Laura. We appreciate everybody. It's just been a really good workshop. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. Just really grateful for the charter and this work group that I think has been very fruitful and a great way to communicate between the agencies and the stakeholders and affected parties. So on behalf of BSC, I'd like to thank everybody's participation. I'd like to thank Ms. Laura Mills for assisting us, getting us through, Timothy O'Malley for being here. I just want to thank everybody for participating in the public rulemaking process for California. So thank you all, And with this, I'd like to end this third workshop. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Yay.